𝐻𝐢𝐧𝐬 𝐶H8EERSEVEEN. I decided to take a breather and looked around, trying to find an empty space. "Come on," I told him, taking his wrist and dragging him out of the crowds. I grabbed another drink as I went, throwing away my cup in a trash can that we passed. "Already dragging me away, and I don't even know your name," he laughed, and I winked at him. When we got to where I wanted to be, I fell to the ground, keeping my drink steady. It wasn't sand, it was just grass, which seemed much better to sit in than sand. "My name's Ruby," I answered him when I got comfortable. He took a seat next to me, close enough that when he moved the slightest bit, his pants would brush his legs. "That's not a boring name." "Then again, I'm guessing you're not a boring person." He leaned closer, and I looked away, my mouth turning up into a smile. "I guess so." I took a sip of my drink, letting the burning alcohol warm me. I wondered what it was, but I figured it must be a mixture of different drinks. People like to get creative at these parties. "I've never seen you before," he said, and I laughed. "I could say the same about you. I know everyone in Fremont, so I would know you if you went there," I told him, taking another big gulp of my drink. Whatever was in that cup warmed my body, and I felt myself loosening up. Seems like it was starting to kick in. "You would be right. I go to St. John's." I lifted an eyebrow, letting out a hum. St. John's was the only Christian school near our town, and it was actually a town over. It was not only preppy, but very strict. If he was caught going to a party, he could be kicked out of school. "You certainly are daring. How'd you hear about this party?" I asked, looking away from him towards the crowds. I noticed a mix of St. John's and Fremont kids. I hadn't noticed before, being too interested in the drinks than the people. "Someone invited someone from St. John's, and it seemed like an open invitation," John told me, and I nodded. "It wasn't Fletcher, he only invited people from Fremont. Even so, he let anyone who was willing come." We were silent for a while, me people watching and him watching me. I always get red-faced when people pay solo attention to me. Don't get me wrong, I love attention, but when it's just one person paying attention to me, it makes me nervous. He made me nervous. Not in the "I'm going to kill you" kind of nervous, but in the just natural, boy kind of nervous. I knew what I was doing was technically wrong. Dottie was constantly growling at me, so I tuned her out. "I'm sure the moon god is frowning down on me. Hey, you matched me with the worst possible guy, so this is what you get." Every time John moved closer, as though he was going to kiss me, I got a feeling in my stomach, and I could see Connell. Stupid, 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 I could only think as I tried to focus. This man is ruining my life. "I'm going to go get another drink," I said suddenly, standing. John looked at me curiously as I stumbled back down to the party, my feet digging in the sand. He waited there as I got another drink, drank half of it in one go, and then came back to him. I didn't want to care about Connell anymore, so as I finished off my drink, not even enjoying it, I knew I was getting there. Was this what I was going to do whenever I wanted to forget? That sounds depressing. "Do you have a boyfriend?" John asked, and I nearly choked on my drink. What a question to ask someone you've just met. "No," I want to say. "I've got something more, something you'll never understand. Something I probably won't ever understand either." Instead, I give him the simple answer, "No." He nods, his brown eyes looking into mine. My skin crawls. In a good way, or bad, I'm not even sure. Suddenly, he leans forward, and his lips crash into mine. When I was a kid, I always wondered what my first kiss would be like. Maddie told me that she wasn't going to wait for her mate, and sure enough, she didn't. She lost her first kiss to her weird neighbor who kept worm boxes under his bed. Zach laughed when she told him. I had juvenile ideas that I would wait until I found my mate. And then I got impatient. It's not impossible to wait. I'm just not that kind of person. My first kiss was stolen by Eddie Baker when I was 12, and it was mortifying. I was impatient, and so I gave it away as though it was candy on Halloween. It didn't bother me after that, I barely thought about it. Then I kissed more boys and had fun. Nothing more though, I knew my limits. When John kissed me, I felt all the anger I had towards Connell all come in at once. I was angry at how carelessly he tossed me to the side. And so I kissed him back, ferociously. He seemed surprised by this but responded accordingly, kissing back. We were in a war over power. I pushed him down, my lips devouring his. He didn't taste good. He tasted like how I'm sure I taste. Bad quality alcohol. There were no sparks. With Connell there would have been sparks. That's what Maddie said was going to happen. Not anymore though. John was demanding, only stopping to breathe for a short second. I barely had time to gasp for a breath before he lowered his lips to mine again. Boys, I thought distastefully as my anger started to flood away. What's wrong? I thought. I wanted this, didn't I? I led him on. I basically put myself out there to the world. Yet now, I didn't want to do it anymore. He put a hand on my thigh and started to travel my dress. Suddenly my mind went in hyperdrive, and I shoved his hand away, breaking the kiss. Before I could say anything else, there was a loud wail of a siren and immediate reaction from the crowds. People immediately started talking, and when the police cars came into view, they started running. I didn't look back at John as I started running towards the crowd, trying to find Maddie or Sarah. I didn't find either in the midst of pushing, drunk teens. My head hurt, and I could feel my vision go in and out. Drunk, yes, I was utterly drunk. I was also confused, trying to find my way out of the mess. When I finally burst out of the crowds, I just happened to be at the wrong side, and was face to face with a cop. Belle was a werewolf, and also a cop. She kept an eye on the safety of the wolves from a different position than just warriors, and she kept us safe. When she recognized me, drunk off my heels and stumbling, she frowned and moved forward, grabbing my elbow with her hand. I stumbled as she took me towards her car, shaking her head as she go. Why I never, your daddy's going to be angry when I pull up with you. She opened the back of her police car's door and ushered me in. Her southern accent was clear and over-exaggerated. It happened when she gets mad at someone. It was so quick, I completely forgot about the fact that I didn't have any shoes. My head was already hurting as we drove towards my home, half from her constant angry spouting, and when she was quiet, she was silently seething, glaring at me through the mirror. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down my head and my stomach. It's not that big of a deal, I tried to console myself. Yet it was. My parents were going to ground me for life. We pulled up to my house too soon for my liking, and she dragged me out of the car. I hung onto her arm, saying nonsensical words, dragging my feet as we walked up the sidewalk to my porch. I stumbled as I was pushed along, trying to sharpen my focus, but failing miserably to do so. This sucks, was all I could think. You're lucky I picked you up and not one of those other officers, MS, Belle said as she helped me up the stairs. Her features softened as she looked down at me. MS, Belle cared too much for her own good, and that's why I liked her. Her caramel eyes left me, and she knocked on the door 3 times. 3 hard knocks, and my heart sank. My mother opened the door, her eyes filled with fire. She must have seen me come up in the driveway and was just waiting for us to get to the door. I looked away from her blue eyes and down towards the ground, defeated. My father stood, arms crossed in the background. I look like my dad more than my mom. I have his curly brown hair and his big brown eyes. My skin color is a mix between my mom and dad's, since my dad was mixed and my mom was as white as a sheet. I looked like my mom in my face, though. Sly, unnoticeable similarities, unless you look for a long time. We had the same nose and the same chin, but our hearts were very different. Maddie loves her mom, more so like a best friend than a mother. I've never understood that. Moms are moms. You love them as the person that gave birth to you, helps you when you're sick, makes you laugh, and gives you unimaginable love. But to love them as a friend almost seems strange. I loved my mom as a mom, but our hearts are different. My heart is filled with so many useless things. I love useless things, things that never matter. I don't have a path, and I don't know what I want to do. I looked forward to have a mate, because I thought I would understand myself more when I had that part of me. But I found I'm much more confused about myself than I was before. So when my mother opened the door, disappointed and ready to yell, I realized how different we really were. She would have never gone out to a party when she was a teen. She would have stayed home and studied. She always knew what she wanted to be, and she did everything possible to reach her goal. I'm just not like her. But I am in so many ways, aren't I? Too many ways, if you ask me. So as I felt the tension in the room, but I also felt something else. Fear. They were scared, as they always were when I went out. Scared I wouldn't come back. That's how parents are, and that's how they are. I felt bad, but when did I not? It felt like I was always feeling bad for one thing or another. "Ruby Delson, you get in this house this instant." My mother's strong voice snapped me out of my long, rambling daydream. She was the head of the house, and everyone knew it. I stumbled into the house, and I was immediately filled with a sense of calm. Vanilla, it was all over. On the couch sat Connell reading a book, uncaring of the situation. He only looked up from his book when I walked into the living room and collapsed on the couch across from him, groaning as I did so. He was victorious, and it made me mad. What made me even more mad was that he didn't flaunt it. I would have. Instead, he just sat there, patiently waiting for my parents to chew me out. "I hate you." "Where were you? What were you thinking? What did you do? Answer me." My mother was stressed, asking continuous questions but getting no answers back. I shrugged, letting my hair fall around my face, shielding my eyes. I put my hands under my thighs to stop them from shaking. "Do you know how it feels to have my daughter hauled home in a cop's car, drunk off her rocks?" I wanted to tune out, but I stopped myself. I dug this grave, can't crawl out now. Connell was silent, watching my mother yell. His hand tightened around his book as every word, before going slack as he put down the book altogether. Sorry was all I could say when she stopped talking. I was going in and out of awareness, my brain not working all the way. My mother was silent, and she turned to MS, Belle. "Thank you, Angel. I don't know how to repay you," my mother said, taking MS, Belle's hand. MS, Belle smiled gently, patting my mother's hand. "It's okay. Anything to keep her safe." MS, Belle took her leave, and I sat in silence as my parents talked with each other. I put my chin in the palm of my hand, closing my eyes. When I opened them, I noticed Connell staring back at me, his blue eyes studying my face. He didn't seem to care that I saw him. In fact, he just kept watching me. My mother noticed that I was about to fall asleep and angrily sighed, rubbing her hand tiredly on her forehead. "Mr. Wood, will you take Ruby up to her room? It's the last door on the right." My mother turned around to quietly argue with my father once again. He was probably trying to defend me. That's what he always did. He was normally more in tune with me than my mother. Connell stood slowly and walked around the coffee table, stopping when he got to me. I tried to get away from him, attempting to stand. I only ended up falling back down into the couch, a grunt leaving my mouth as my breath was knocked out of me. "Silly girl," Connell mumbled to himself, leaning down to pick me up. One of his arms went under my legs, while the other went around my waist to secure me. He held all my weight with ease, seeming to have no problem. Of course. My parents didn't notice as he walked to the stairs straight past them. He went up the steps slowly, carefully. I found myself falling asleep in his arms as I was lulled back and forth as we went. I was too tired to open my eyes, but I could hear him open the door to my room. I didn't even open my eyes when I was jerked suddenly. I only heard him swear. He must have stepped on something. He placed me on my bed carefully, pushing my covers back, and then pulling the blankets back on me. I rolled around, finally turning in his direction. I could hear his breathing as he looked at me, and then as he looked around the room. Dottie was happy for his closeness, savoring it. My mind went heavy and clouded as I was on the brink of falling asleep. Before I went completely, I heard his jacket crinkle as he moved, leaning down. He pushed back the hair on my face. The last thing I felt before I was completely asleep was him rubbing his thumb on my cheek. The last thing I heard was him walking away. 𝐶HAPTEREIGHT. I woke up with a painful headache, and my parents once again yelling at me. I buried my face in my pillow as they yelled, nearly falling asleep once again. I couldn't fall asleep though, not anymore. The verdict in my house was that I was going to be grounded for a month. No more, no less. It was surprising. Normally it would be much longer. But I found when I stumbled downstairs that there was another issue floating around my house, one that held a much more important status. Her birthday is on Monday. I stopped halfway down the stairs, pushing myself against the wall so I could listen. I knew what they were talking about, and it wasn't about me. I frowned as I closed my eyes, heightening my senses so that I could hear with utmost clearness. I could hear my mother sigh. It was a pained sigh, an upset sigh. I tugged at my necklace, wrapping my fingers around the ring. It was hers once, before. I know. Ruby's going to have a tough time. She always does, my mother answered back. She was probably looking towards the stairs, thinking about me in my room. I could hear my pulse in my ears as I strained to listen. I was too hungover for this. Why don't we send a letter to her parents? My father was always an optimist, always wanting to do the right thing. They don't deserve a letter, my mother snapped back, and my father sighed in response. I wanted to tell her that she was right, but I couldn't find my voice. My parents went silent for a few fleeting moments, and then my mother talked again. She was more ours than theirs. I felt my eyes welling as I took a deep breath, letting my hands fall from my necklace. 𝐀𝐥𝐩𝐡𝐚. I opened my eyes and swallowed. My throat was starting to constrict as I started to remember. Shaking my head, I calmed myself down before walking completely downstairs. My mom was turned away from my dad, chopping up a banana for her fruit bowl. She turned to me when I got downstairs and gave me a slight smile. She was thinking about too many things to be continuously mad at me. I gave her a smile back and went to hug my dad, who was reading a newspaper. He gave me a kiss on my head and asked how I was feeling. Good, I lied, pushing myself up onto the stool next to him. We had a kitchen island and bar stool on one side. That's where my dad liked to sit and eat breakfast every morning. My mother put a bowl of fruit in front of me, and I started eating graciously. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. I'm going to go to the store to get some groceries. Do you want to come, Ruby? My mother asked, cleaning up the mess she made. I shook my head, shoving another spoonful of fruit into my mouth. I used to love go grocery shopping when I was 9. My mother already knew the answer before I said it, so she left soon after that. My father followed, saying he had some work he had to do. When they were gone, I cleaned up my bowl and decided I needed to go for a run. Dottie had been neglected for too long and was itching to have control. I had a box behind a shed that I put my clothes in when I shift, so I stripped and put them in it. The shift was painful, more so than usual. My fault, since I hadn't shifted in so long. My wolf was a spotted brown and black wolf. My parents both had solid coats, and I just had a mixture of both of them. I was small, but not too small. Just average. Small for alpha blood, though. The woods behind my house went back as far as you could run. They went into Royal Grove, a huge natural park. It was often frequented by people, so I tended to stay in the proximity of my house. As I ran, Dottie slowly took over. She enjoyed being in wolf form, much more than when I'm in human form. It's because you do stupid things in human form, she'd always say. She wasn't wrong. I just sat back and let her do what she wanted, until I got a whiff of something. It smelled sweet and familiar. Taking back control, I put my nose to the ground, taking a deep breath. Vanilla. Everywhere. It was everyone. I hadn't noticed because I wasn't in control, but now I couldn't think about anything else. He had been everywhere. In my woods. Mine. I angrily snarled to myself, lifting my head as I narrowed my eyes, looking in the layers of the trees. He was here, I could feel it. Did he know I was here too? Probably. I took a few careful steps forward, straining my ears once again to listen. I could hear the leaves fall from the trees, and the sound of distant animals stepping on sticks. But not a wolf. He came up from the side, quiet and meticulous. How had I not heard him? I could only figure his training had been intense. His wolf was large and a warm caramel color. He stalked forward slowly, looking me over to make sure I was not a threat. Once he figured out who I was, he went out of danger mode and stood up straighter. I growled at him, staking my dominance. What dominance? I wanted to laugh at myself. He just looked down at me, unaffected. I wanted to yell at him that this was my territory and that he was intruding, but I couldn't. I growled again, this time angrier. This time he growled back, much more ferociously. His growl was loud, and it made me whimper. It wasn't out of fear. I wasn't sure I would ever fear him. I wasn't sure why I did it. After I whimpered, he went quiet, his eyes studying me. I could feel the atmosphere change from tense to something else. I even thought I saw something flash in his eyes. Regret. It was gone in seconds, though, and he turned to leave. He was going in the way of my house, our houses, so I followed him. He was a few meters ahead of me, and he walked at a steady pace. When we got to the clearing behind our houses, I veered away from him, going to my shed. I peered behind me, and he was nowhere in sight, so I changed back into my human form. Dottie was silent, just as she was when he growled at us. I got my clothes on quickly, making sure that he was nowhere in sight. Somewhere in me there was a feeling that I wanted him to see. Maybe he'll like me then. I brushed off the thought as I tied my shoes. When I walked into the clearing, I saw him. He was bent down, messing with something on the ground. It was flowers that were severely dead. Not his fault. They've been dead since before he moved in. The real estate agent in charge of the house had put flowers up, but they were never watered. The wind blew gently, carrying my scent with it. When it reached him, he looked up, his eyes finally reaching me. As always, he looked neutral. I wasn't as nice, giving him a nasty glare. Angry, yes, I was very angry. Angry at him, angry at life. Some might say I'm just being angsty. He glared back at me, standing up straight. My eyes traveled down, and I lost my glare as I saw that he had no shirt.no. Shirt. I know a new thing about Connell now. Under those button-ups he wears, he had abs. He was also tan, which made me wonder how often he didn't wear a shirt. Do all English teachers have abs? He noticed me staring and he cracked a smile. Yes, that's right, Connell smiled at something. With a huff, I turned on my heel, leaving quickly. My face burned and I hoped he hadn't seen. Of course he had to see me ogling him, though. I wanted to make him want me, not look like I want him. When I got to my door, I looked towards his house one last time, and for a brief moment, our eyes met once again. And then we both turned away. 𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿. Some people have a natural beauty inside and out. I'd say 𝐀𝐥𝐸 was one of those people. She had a sort of sensitivity. She knew what people meant, no matter what they said. She cared about everyone else much more than she cared about herself. Sometimes she cared too little about herself, that it was concerning. She's been gone for 6 years. 6 years is a long time to be gone. She left so suddenly, sometimes it feels as though we didn't say goodbye at all. In a lot of ways, we didn't. Her birthday was always a fun occasion. If anything, I liked it more than my own. We would go get ice cream, even though she was lactose intolerant. Then she'd take me on a run, even though I stumbled and she had much better things she could be doing. But today it seemed far too solemn. My parents were gone, already off to work. They let me stay home, but figured it would be better to distract themselves than face what had happened. Zach went out with his friends, trying to find his own form of distraction. Maddie and Sarah were sad themselves, so they had a sleepover. They invite me every year, and every year I decline. We all had our own ways of coping, and mine was more of a solo act. I woke up later than normal. My body felt heavy as I realized what day it was, and I couldn't pull myself out of bed for a long time. It's almost as though she's dead, even though I truly believe she's not. Juju seemed unaffected by my troubles, barking over and over outside my door to force me out of bed. Once I got to the door, he stopped barking and looked at me with his big puppy eyes. Was that necessary? I cooed as I bent down to pick him up. I hugged him to my chest, sighing as I tried to clear my head. Walking downstairs, I got a quick bowl of cereal, and I thought about what I wanted to do. Normally, I just sulked around all day, which I felt as though would be my plans once again. Letting out a deep breath, I looked at my surroundings, trying to draw inspiration. Just as I was about to give up, the door to my backyard caught my eye. Yes, fresh air. A natural healer. I think. My backyard is medium-sized, with a white picket fence enclosing it. We have a patio when you step out the door, which has a few outdoor chairs, a grill, and a fire pit. A few stray trees shade the outmost part of the backyard, and my treehouse was located in the biggest tree. I sat in one of the lounge chairs as I soaked in the sun, letting a sigh leave my lips. Maybe I just needed to relax. Naturally, I'm not good at relaxing, so I opened my eyes to look around. The leaves had almost all fallen from the trees, which made the ground colored. There was a gentle breeze, which had a bite of cold, making me shiver. Perhaps this wasn't the best idea. Trying to shake it off, I looked around some more. I could see Connell's house across the way, his backyard in view of mine. It was a wreck, product of it being left alone for so long. A satisfied hum left my mouth as I smile, closing my eyes once again and tilting back my head to the sun. Serves him right. I sat like that for a few long moments before I started to look around once more. My eyes finally settled on my treehouse. My parents built it when my brother was a kid, so I've never known a time when it wasn't there. I haven't been in it for years, though, a depressing outcome of growing up. Standing from my chair, I slowly walked to the tree, looking up. Of course, younger me tied up the rope in the treehouse, thinking climbing the tree was more fun. Letting out an irritated sigh, I grabbed onto one of the branches, ranking myself up. My feet found their place in familiar grooves, and my mind seemed to fill in the gaps. I made my way up the tree in no time, and though I struggled to get the door open, I managed it in the end. The treehouse was small, smaller than I remember. "You're not 12 anymore," Dottie mumbled to me. I shook my head, pulling myself through the hole completely and shutting the door and latch. There was a small wooden hole that served as the window, homemade shutters latched to stop critters from entering. Oak shelves lined the walls, random toys and books resting on them. There was a beanbag chair, a small pink rug, and a small bed all below the shelves. I sat on the bed, running my hands on the cover. A long time ago, it was Mika's, her home away from home. It seemed as though she was in this bed, then her own. I stood up from the flowered covers and looked at the items that lined the walls. Silly bands, a Jonas Brothers CD, a pair of 2 small, fake Uggs. I found a smile tracing my lips, my mood lifting. Perhaps this was a good idea. I stayed in the treehouse for a few more minutes, examining everything I could find. Once I had looked at everything and stuffed a few prized possessions in my pocket, I decided it was probably time to leave. Something caught my eye under Mickey's bed before I had a chance, though. Frowning, I got on my knees, looking under the bed. In the very far corner, pushed all the way against the wall, was a small silver box. I groaned as I reached for it, my fingers barely touching it, but giving me a good enough grip to pull it towards me. When I got it out, I held it to my chest, standing. Sitting on the bed, I examined the box. There was a small clasp, which was easily flipped up. I forced the stuck box open, looking inside. It was filled to the brim with notes, trinkets, random things. A laugh left my mouth as I lifted up a small plush monkey. Squeezing it, it started singing Happy Birthday in an annoyingly hyper voice. I had given it to Mika years before. I started to recognize other things. Notes my friends and I had written her, a cheap necklace from her first boyfriend, a bottle opener that she used for root beer. I knew she was sentimental, but I was impressed. I emptied the box quickly, looking at everything once over, before setting them on the bed. I was about to set the box aside, when I noticed one last thing in the box. There was a crumbled letter in the bottom of the box, my name scrawled in Mika's neat writing on the smooth side. My curiosity piqued as I pulled it out, tossing the box to the side. It flipped the crinkled letter in my hand, my nail going under the sealed opening. Ripping it open, I pulled out a piece of paper. Dear Ruby, I wish I could tell you this in person, but it isn't possible, and I don't have much time. I never thought that this would happen, and sometimes I wish I'd have better luck. I can't do anything more now than hope for the best. I can't tell you everything, even if I want to. I've gotten myself into trouble, and the only way I think I can fix it is by leaving. The ring that I'm going to give you is very powerful, and all you need to know is that you have to keep it safe. Basically, don't lose it. If someone gets a hold of it, it will cause massive problems. No one else has my confidence to take care of it. I'm going on the run, and I hope to be in Louisiana before your mom and dad realize I'm gone. My parents too, of course, but I figure they wouldn't care all that much. Someone's after me, and it would be better if I led them away. I've caused this trouble, I have to try to fix it. Please take care, Ruby. One day I'll be with you again. Love, Mika. I felt tears fill my eyes as I took a deep breath, folding the letter close. I didn't understand. She had told me very little when she left. The basics, that she was sorry and that she couldn't explain. She removed her ring, forced it in my hand, and gave me a kiss on the cheek before leaving. She didn't even look back. I sat there processing what I read. I had so many questions that I knew would go unanswered. She left 6 years ago, so there was a slim chance that I could ever find her. My hand went to my ring, letting it fall into the palm of my hand so I could examine it. I thought it was normal enough. It was a thin silver band with engraved vines on the outside and inscribed words on the inside. I could never figure out what the words said, considering they were in another language, and I soon lost interest. I never wore the ring because it was too big for me at the time, and to be honest, I never felt like it was mine to wear. I put everything back in the box, leaving out the letter, and then kicked the box under the bed. It cracked against the wood with a bang, and then the treehouse was silent once again. Forcing the door of the treehouse open, I untied the rope ladder and let it fall, not willing to put my life on climbing down the tree without falling. Within a few moments I was down the tree, letter stuffed in my back pocket. When I was safely inside my house, I pulled out the letter, looking it over once more. For once, my mind was completely free of Connell, though it was full with another type of darkness. I looked over the letter over and over, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? My parents were torn enough over what had happened, so telling them right now wasn't an option. I knew if I told them they'd drop everything to go off and find her, even though there was a small chance we ever could. After all, we only had one thing: Louisiana, and that was not much at all. I folded up the note and put it in the bottom of my underwear drawer. No one goes in there but me. Once it was safely hidden under mismatched bras, I let out a sigh and collapsed on my bed. A normal day would be very appreciated. PLLIIEBOY. 𝐶HAHPTERTEN. It's a normality in my household for me to wake up late, so when I woke up early, hell nearly froze over. Cuddled with the fact that it was a Wednesday, my laziest day, my parents were very suspicious. I woke up without an alarm or my brother yelling at me. It was dark, the moon still bright in the sky. It would be a full moon in a few days, which I tried to push out of my mind. Dottie was still sleepy when I dragged myself out of bed. I hadn't looked at the time, figuring it was late as always. It was only when I pulled back my curtains and saw the moonlit darkness that I realized something was off. The time on my clock indicated I had an hour and a half to get ready for school. Normally I'd have 20 minutes, so this was a pleasant surprise. I wasn't sure the speed of which to get ready, since I knew I didn't have to go turbo speed like normal. Then sparked a brilliant idea. Connell was going to want me. I spread my makeup on my counter, looking at the brushes and bottles in desperation. I needed this to go well. Concealer, foundation, some watery stuff, some pink stuff. It all seemed to fit as I applied, and by the end I was impressed with myself. I didn't look half bad. Picking out a dress was hard, but I ended up going with a white dress that was cinched at the waist and flowed down to my thighs. How pure Dottie snorted. I snapped back at her in my head as I tried to find shoes. My hair was a mess, as always, so I decided to just put it in Dutch braids. Even when I was done with that, I still had time to leisure around. Everyone was already downstairs talking, and just like Saturday, I could hear them talking in hushed whispers to each other. My parents seemed to be questioning Zach about something, so I stepped back a few steps so I could safely listen. "Honey, we just want to help Ruby, so if you know what's going on with her, just please tell us," my mother pleaded Zach. Her voice had an undertone of urgency. I closed my eyes, trying to listen closer. He wouldn't tell, would he? He promised he wouldn't, and I trusted him with my life, but what if he did because he thought it would help me? He sighed, "Mom, I'm not the one to tell you what's happening with her. She just wants space right now." My mother wasn't pleased with that answer, sighing. She was pacing from one side of the kitchen to the other, a habit I inherited. "She seems fine, honestly, Mom. I think you're just overreacting." My brother's voice faded off, and I could tell he was trying to sound convincing. He wanted to help me, I knew, and I also knew that he felt completely useless keeping it to himself. For me, though, that was what I felt was necessary. I decided to end his misery and went down the stairs, a smile on my face. My father looked up from his paper as I walked in, shock cast on his face. Isn't it weird when your family finds it shocking that you're awake early? My brother was leaning against the kitchen counter, his arms crossed and a contemplative look on his face. "Hello, family," I grinned as I walked in, checking the time on the clock as I walked towards the table. There was nothing there, product of me being so early, which was good, because I wasn't actually planning on eating anything. My mother stopped mid-step, her mouth opening slightly. When she came back to her senses, she blinked a few times and started to look confused. Well, I'm going to be off. I didn't want to drag on the ordeal any longer, so I turned towards the door, only taking a few steps before a voice stopped me. "Ruby, honey, you've not eaten anything." My mother stopped me, her voice laced with concern. I wasn't hungry, just nervous. Sharply turning, I gave my mom my heartbreaker smile, which she usually rolls her eyes at, and responded, "I'm not hungry." Once again I turned away, this time finally leaving. Before I got out the door, I heard my father say something. "At least we know she's not pregnant." There was a fleeting moment, and then a loud groan as my mother hit my father. Since it was so early, I got to school in record time. The road were impeded, and the sun barely peeked up over the skyline. I drank some ice water, fearing an energy crash. The school had a few cars scattered about. The teacher's parking lot was a quarter full. I knew that most teachers arrived at the last possible moment. The student parking lot had a few cars, with more pulling in. Early risers, I thought distastefully. Sure, at this current moment I was one, but that wouldn't last for more than one morning. The ability to wake up early on a regular basis was unfound to me. I sat in my car for a while, people watching. It was fascinating, the people who came in early. A multitude stereotypical nerds, athletes coming to practice before school, regular people who had nothing better to do. When I figured it would be a good time to walk in, I smoothed down my dress, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of my car. There was an instant regret for not bringing a jacket. I had completely forgotten, and my mother was so shocked at me coming down so early, she forgot to force me into an ugly jacket. The inside of school was about as vacant as the outside. The snobby office lady was still there, an uninterested look on her face as she ignored someone standing in front of her. Normally I was that person, asking for an attendance slip. I stopped by 𝐊𝐿𝐷𝐷 and 𝐼's joint locker, switching out books, before going to English. I stopped 2 doors away from the classroom, peeking around a corner like an idiot to see if he was in there. His lights were on, and after taking a few deep breaths, I could smell his scent. I went forward a door and peered a little further in to make sure no one else was in the classroom. Once I was sure, I took a deep breath and nodded, walking forward. You know the feeling of instant regret? That's what I felt as soon as I stepped through the door. What was the point? I was trying to convince the man, who had broken my wolfy heart, took like me. It felt almost pitiful, but I didn't have enough time to think about that as I went past the point of return. I decided to shelf my uncertainty and put on my bravest face, walking as nonchalantly as I could to my desk. The steady beat of his pen stopped as his gaze burned into me. My cheeks started to heat up as I walked to my seat. Once I sat down, he continued writing, his eyes once again on his paper. Frustrated, I crossed my arms, looking at him intensely. I knew he most likely wouldn't look up, since he was purposefully looking away. What had I done wrong? I knew that I was a try-hard, which I was sure every girl was at some point. We all want to impress someone sometime, but even now I was confused to how little attention he paid me. Shaking off the feeling, I watched him a bit more, uncrossing my arms to lean forward. I think I was more uncomfortable than him as I stared daggers into him, my eyes going from his athletic frame back to his face. Finally, he glanced up, unable to deny my aggressive leer. When our eyes met, he seemed taken aback, taking me in fully. I wasn't sure if he was looking at my dress or at the fact that I looked like a psychopath. "What are you doing?" he asked when he was brought back to reality. I gave my best coy smile, my fingers curling around my hair. "What do you mean?" I evaded his question, tilting my head. Whenever I did that, I felt like a dog, but I was told it was cute. He said nothing, just blinking as he watched my face. My stomach twisted as he put down his pen, his other hand going through his curly brown hair. "This isn't like you," he said simply, and I felt myself get angry, as if he would know. I stood from my seat, leaning further over my desk. "Like you know." "You don't know anything about me," I snapped, my voice cracking halfway through. A small, somber laugh left my mouth as I crossed my arms over my chest. "Not that you want to," I muttered bitterly under my mouth. Something in Connell's eyes changed, and he was about to say something before he was interrupted by another student walking in. I sat before they could look up from the phone they were glued to. Connell closed his mouth and frowned, looking back at the papers he had before him. A shaky sigh left my mouth as I tightly closed my eyes, calming myself. Dottie was silent, retreating back to where I couldn't reach her. Class started half an hour later. Maddie and Sarah had plenty of questions, which I dodged the best I could. Fletcher put a wet kiss on my cheek, jokingly winking at me as he went to join his boyfriend in the back of the class. I shook my head, my eyes wandering to the front of the classroom where Connell sat with an unpleasant face. It looked as though he had just bitten into a lemon. I stifled a laugh as my spirits rose, and I decided to join my friends in their conversation. It was APP time, which was basically free time before class. My mind was clear for most of the class, as I chose to simply ignore Connell. My entire plan had gone out of the window in less than a minute. It wasn't a very good plan to begin with. Dottie's sassy voice was well welcomed, and I was surprised by her comeback rate. It seemed like she was getting better every day. "Shush, Dottie," I poked back, and Dottie let out a dog-like bark. I finished work with speed I didn't even know I had, and just sat around, looking at everything but Connell for the rest of class. We weren't allowed to have phones in class after the cat incident. When we were packing up, Connell's voice interrupted my thoughts. "MS. Delson, please stay behind." My heart nearly stopped as I completely froze, my hands halfway in my bag as I was looking for my math homework that I didn't do. I glanced up to a completely unfazed classroom and a occupied Connell. I was hoping I was just hearing things, but it was once again resaid as I went to leave. Dragging my feet, I walked to one of the front desks, sitting down on it slowly. He looked up from his papers, his eyes stern. "I'm not going to take back my assumptions," he said once the last person had left. My eyebrows furrowed as I leaned back, trying to remember our previous conversation. "Whatever you're trying to do, or trying to get at, isn't going to work," he finished, his eyes watching my faces closely. Behind his eyes, I knew there was emotion he was hiding. I just couldn't figure out what kind. On the outside, he looked as stone cold as one could be. "How could you be so cruel?" I whimpered, my eyes narrowing as I stood, hatred flowing through my veins. I took a gasping breath before shaking my head and walking to the door. There was no protest, yet I stopped at the doorframe. "You're such an asshole, and you don't even see it. I just wanted an apology." I left right after, feeling victorious for getting the last word. I might have fibbed just a bit about my motives, but he didn't have to know that. I hoped it hurt. I once again saw my sadistic tendencies and tried to shove them into a corner. Maybe sadistic tendencies were just teenage tendencies. I skipped the rest of class, telling my friends that I was feeling sick. They didn't think much of it, knowing I had been having a rough few weeks. The drive home took a quick few minutes, and not long after I was bundled up in my shaggy blankets, snugly asleep. CHAPERTEEN. When I feel the heat, I see the light. Everett Dirksen. It was evening when I woke up from my nap. The sky was turning a bruised purple, with a soft mix of pastels. Not that I could pay attention to that, because all I could pay attention to was the uncomfortable heat. Sitting up, I kicked the blankets off of me, getting off my bed. My skin was sticky and hot, making me groan as I tried to cool off. Tying my hair into a bun, I opened my window and leaned out, taking a deep breath. The cold air nipped at my face and neck before the effect was lost. Nothing seemed to work. The heat spread through my body, and I could feel my skin getting red. Soon it became unbearable, causing me to shed my clothes. My room was suffocating me as I tried gasping for breaths, though it was to no avail, because I could never catch my breath. I filled up my bathtub with cold water and got in as soon as possible, breathing heavily. Hastily, I submerged myself in the water, holding my breath. Just like the window, it had a short-term effect, before completely diminishing. Staying like that for a few moments, I tried to get the heat out of my mind, but alas, it was all I could think about. It was starting to hurt. Sitting up, I grabbed the sides of the tubs and yelled at the top of my lungs for 𝐊𝐥. 𝐊𝐥, I screamed, my voice cracking halfway through. My body was on fire, and I felt as though I was naked in the savannah. On my fifth plea, I heard my bedroom door swing open, and my brother run in. He stopped at the bathroom door, his eyes looking towards the ceiling. Through blurry eyes, I could see his bronze skin and curly hair, and a warmth of familiarity flooded through me. For a second, I felt the relief of knowing I was going to be safe. Ruby, what's wrong? He asked urgently, his hand going to cover his eyes as he turned slightly away from me. I couldn't speak, I could only cry out in pain. 𝐊𝐥's expression changed to shock as he heard me cry, before going back to alarmed. 𝐊𝐥 didn't understand, but he tried to help anyways. Blindly walking forward, he patted around for a towel, knocking over my trash can. Once he found what he was looking for, he opened it and tossed it over me. Before I could rip it off, he reached down to hold it on me, opening his eyes. I tried to fight him, but I was too weak, only slipping in the tub. Another wail was ripped from my lips as my tears started to fall. Though I wouldn't say I cried a lot, it seemed as though I'm always crying as of late. What's wrong, Ruby? He demanded once again, shaking me as he tried to get an answer. My sobs became quiet and I couldn't pay much attention, my mind fading in and out. It burns was all I managed to choke out. 𝐊𝐥 looked distressed, not knowing what to do. I cried for a bit longer, until the fatigue took over. My body became heavy and weak, and I became quiet. Silently, I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths. The last thing I could hear was 𝐊𝐥 calling my name. I woke up to the soft murmur of my parents. I couldn't focus on what they were saying, but the first voice to become clear was 𝐊𝐥. He was talking in a rushed voice to my parents, worry laced into his voice. As she just started screaming, saying she was hot, 𝐊𝐥 said. My mother and father were talking over each other, arguing. Are you sure? My mother asked 𝐊𝐥, confused. Mom, I've said it 7 times, that's all that happened. My mother let out a sigh, and I felt her cool hand touch my forehead. I furrowed my eyebrows, letting out a groan as I tried to open my eyes. When I did, I was immediately met by the worried faces of my parents. The sun had gone down, and it seemed to be quite a bit later. I guess I slept much longer than I thought. My mother, I presume, had put me in my strawberry pajamas. I had blankets tucked in all around me, as well as a freezing ice pack on my forehead. Slowly moving my hand to my forehead, I took off the ice pack, which was starting to make my head ache. Ruby, baby, how do you feel? My mom asked as soon as I focused, moving my hair from my face. Her eyes were soft and concerned, and she was in full force mother mode. Fine, my voice cracked, and my brother moved to hand me a water bottle. With difficulty I opened it, chugging half of it down in one go right after. I felt better after that, finally able to really understand what was happening. I'd never had something like that happen before, so I had as many questions for my parents as they had for me. Do you remember what happened? My dad asked, coming to sit by my side. His calloused hand grabbed mine, squeezing. My father was never good at comforting people, but I appreciated the effort. Once I thought back and collected my thoughts, I answered him. It was almost hard to remember what happened, but I had a brief understanding. I don't know, I woke up really hot. I tried to cool myself off, but nothing worked, so I went to the bath. I spoke slowly, looking up at my ceiling. It started to hurt, so I called for 𝐊𝐥. My mother looked troubled, just as 𝐊𝐥 had earlier. Seeing her look like that made my stomach turn. One of the worst things is knowing your parents don't know what to do. Looking away from me, my mother looked at my father, her mouth turning into a frown. My father shook his head, squeezing my hand once again. It's not possible, was all he said. My mother just looked back to me, her frown changing into a gentle smile. I wasn't sure if the expression on my face was confused or worried as well. Ruby, we need you to be honest, my mother started, her voice quivering. She was having a hard time collecting her thoughts, it seemed. My stomach twisted as I looked at her, unsure what to do since she was acting so vulnerable. Did you find your mate? My eyes widened, and all I could do was stay quiet. Swiftly, I looked at 𝐊𝐥, who seemed as shocked as I. It seemed like he hadn't said anything. I knew I couldn't hide it any longer, and I just had to believe there was reason for it coming out. I was having trouble keeping the secret anyways. With burning eyes, I looked back at them. I couldn't speak, so all I did was nod. My mom let out a sharp breath, her hand going to her mouth. My father stood, my hand slipping from his and falling to my side. I saw my mom's eyes fill with tears, and I saw her choke them back, trying to calm herself. "Baby, did he reject you?" I blinked and felt myself get upset. It seemed that everything I was trying to avoid was weaseling its way deeper into my life. My mother got the signals and reached for me, hugging me tightly. We were only interrupted by my dad's angry voice as he stomped around my room. "That bastard. I'm going to kill him," he growled, his inner wolf begging to come out. It wasn't often I'd seen him like that. In fact, I'd only seen it a few times. "Sit down, Walter," my mother snapped with strong ferocity. My father let out a noise before sitting down in a chair near my door, his arms crossed. While he cooled down, my brother took his place at my side. He stroked my hair, which normally would earn him a swift kick in the jewels, but I decided it was okay, just this once. "Is this what you were hiding, Zach?" my mother asked Zach. She wasn't angry, she just wanted to know. My brother nodded, apologizing soon after. Shaking her head, my mom just hugged Zach and sat on the other side of him. We sat in silence for a few moments, before my mother spoke out again. "You went into heat. That's why you started feeling how you felt. When a woman is rejected by their mate, the soul fights for its other half. If it can't reach it, it will go into a period of extreme heat," my mother said carefully, making sure I understood. I grimaced as she talked, thinking it all sounded rather gruesome. "It will happen as long as you are rejected," my mother finished. That part caught my interest in particular, and I found myself sitting up. "Whoa, hold on. Are you saying I'll always be like this?" My voice was staccato, and my mother gave me a slow nod. "It will come in waves, a few at first, and then more sporadic as you get older." I let out a groan, my anger for Connell completely resurfacing. He had to have known. Why couldn't he feel the heat? Why was it only for girls? "This sucks," I mumbled to myself, rubbing my eyes. My mom let out a laugh, patting my leg. That's when I started to feel the heat creep in again. This time it was faster, much more abrasive than the last. "Mom," I started to say. Before I could get the words out, though, when the heat spread all over my body. With a choked gasp, I kicked the blankets away from me, and my mother started to yell to my brother. I couldn't hear what she was saying, though, because it all was muffled together. I closed my eyes and hoped for the pain to stop. 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐼𝐻𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑇𝑊𝐸. Connell's POV. Sen. My house is lonely. Perhaps that is because it's always empty, but right now it just looks like a sad, lonely place. Sometimes I think that it was always a sad house, because it doesn't look like it was ever light. Taking my bag from my car, I slammed the door shut and started walking to my front door. It was dark out, product of me going to the gym after school. Since I wasn't getting the same amount of exercise as I got from training, I had to supplement it somehow. As I was fiddling with my keys, trying to find the right one, I glanced over at Ruby's house. It was painful, knowing that she wouldn't understand. Every time I see her face, I can feel the pain she's in. She won't ever understand, nor will my wolf, but it's for the best. I can't sleep anymore. My nights are filled with tossing and turning, my restless wolf begging for me to come to my senses. Sometimes I almost listen to him, walking downstairs and stopping at the door. Looking away from her house, I let out a tired sigh and opened my door, walking it. Jax met me at the door, panting happily. Putting down my duffel bag, I went to my knees, running my hands through his fluffy hair. I let him lick my face before walking to my living room. The floor plan was simple. When you walk in, there are stairs straight in front of you, and a hallway going to the back of the house. To the left is the living room and a small office, and to the right is a kitchen and the dining room. It was a big house, too big for one person. I took off my coat and shoes, letting out a sigh as I sat on my sofa. Jax jumped up next to me, curling up into my side. We sat like that for a few minutes, before I decided to get up and get a beer. Jax just sat and watched as I stood, leaving my comfortable seat, which I knew was going to be overtaken as soon as I left. My kitchen had a lot of windows which faced straight onto Ruby's house. Generally, I closed them, because it seemed like a strange invasion of privacy, but today they were open. Her house was lit up like a firecracker. They had nice big windows, and you could see the light shine from all of them. Even the ones that had curtains, they were bright with the light behind them. I pulled a beer from the fridge and cracked it open as I looked at her house, curiosity taking me over. Taking a big gulp of my drink, I reached towards the window and closed the shutters tight, turning away. Walking back to the couch, I sat down, patting Jax, who was sleeping. Before I had a chance to settle down, my doorbell rang. It was one of those cheerful doorbells, so it went on for quite a while. Normally, I would just let it ring, but I decided to be hospitable. With a sigh, I stood and made my way to the door. Opening it, I was taken aback by what I saw. There was Mrs. Delson, her face red and full of worry. Her son stood next to her, Zach, if I can remember correctly. He resembled his father, tall with light brown skin and curly hair. When I looked down to his arms, I easily recognized Ruby, though her face was turned away. Her long hair was covering her face, but when it was removed, she had a pained expression. My stomach twisted in immediate fear over her being hurt, and I reached for her, taking her from Zach's arms. Though he was unwilling, he let me, and I cocooned Ruby against my chest. She let out a sigh of relief and tried to get closer, much to my surprise. She's in heat, and we're out of ice. Cold water isn't working anymore, Ruby's mother cried, and I squeezed Ruby in my arms, realizing what was wrong. I had completely forgotten that was an offset of rejection. Zach looked at me curiously, before looking past towards my stairs. "Do you have any ice?" he asked, and I nodded, motioning to my kitchen. "I have a pack in the freezer, just get as much as you can and I'll put her in the tub," I told them, and moved towards the stairs. Ruby's mom stayed down, going to the kitchen with Zach. I held her close to me as I ran up the stairs and to the bathroom. Once we were in the bathroom, I lowered her on the ground so I could turn on the tub. She immediately moaned, shaking her head as she blindly reached out for me. She wasn't completely lucid. It seemed like her body was the thing reacting. "I'm sorry, Ruby," I apologized as I gently laid her on the tile, reaching for the knob on the faucet. She would have had a snappy remark if she could focus, but now she only stayed silent. Ruby wrapped her arms around my leg. "The only way to calm down the heat was to be close to your mate so that the bond starts to heal." Kneeling on the tile, I let Ruby hug me, trying to relieve her pain. As soon as her mother came up, I would have to leave, which means she would be in more pain. Ruby was nearly limp in my arms, all her movements slow. We stayed like that for a few moments, before I heard Zach's loud footsteps trample up my stairs. I moved away from Ruby, though she protested, and stood, moving away. "I've got the ice," Zach said as he poured ice into the tub. Ruby's mom came in soon after that, pouring in a bowl full of ice. Her mother shooed Zach and I out, closing the door behind us as she started stripping Ruby of her clothes. I could hear Ruby's cries from my bedroom, and as they got worse, my chest started to constrict. With a sigh, I left my room, walking downstairs. Jax was still in a pleasant sleep on the couch, snoring lightly. Rubbing my face sleepily, I sat on my couch, picking up my beer. Zach came to join me, sitting in a nearby seat. We sat in silence, both of our minds clouded with thoughts. He was staring at me, a contemplating look on his face. "She's your mate, isn't she?" he finally asked, and I froze. She hadn't told him, he just deducted. Taking a sip of beer, I sat silent, trying to think of an answer. "Yes, sorry I broke your sister's heart." He looked impatient, so I just decided to nod, looking away from him. The air in the room thickened as he got angrier. "You don't understand," I tried to tame him, cautiously putting down my drink. His eyes were changing colors, a key sign that his inner wolf was coming out. Though he was of strong blood, I could easily take him down. I didn't want it to get to that, however, knowing I shouldn't make myself any more unpopular with Ruby. "What don't I understand?" "You denied my sister of the one thing she's always wanted," he growled, standing. I stood too, putting my hands up. "Listen, it was what was best," I told him, walking to the kitchen. He followed me, pulling my shoulder back as we reached the hallway. "What do you mean?" His hand tightened on my shoulder, but I didn't remove "What's best for your sister isn't me," I replied simply, and I felt his grip loosen. It seemed I was finally getting through to him. "Do you understand what you've done to her?" he said slowly, looking towards the stairs. She was probably still in the tub, in pain. I sighed, rubbing my face. I understood more than both of them thought. I know. We both sat in silence. He had calmed down, his wolf under control. I knew he would always be angry, but he also wanted Ruby to be safe. If that meant not with me, then he'd take that chance. The atmosphere changed, and all the negative energy slipped away. I turned away from Zach to go into the kitchen, looking for a glass. Once I poured water into it, I left Zach and walked upstairs to my room. The bathroom door was still closed, but I could hear Mrs. Delson's voice soothing Ruby. There was a loud sloshing sound as Mrs. Delson pulled Ruby from the tub. Walking to my drawers, I pulled out one of my shirts for Mrs. Delson to put on her. I figured Mrs. Delson could figure out her underwear situation. I knocked on the bathroom door, and once Mrs. Delson's face greeted mine, I handed her the shirt. She thanked me, before proceeding to slam the door in my face. Backing away, I walked back downstairs, going straight to the couch once again. This time Zach was on his phone, paying no attention to me. We sat in silence for a few minutes before soft footsteps drew our attention to the stairs. Ruby's asleep, I put her in your bed. I hope you don't mind, Mrs. Delson said, almost embarrassed. It's all right, she can stay there for the night, I told her, and I could hear Zach's disapproving grumble from the corner. Mrs. Delson smiled with thanks and went to her son, giving him a hug. You can stay in the guest room overnight if you'd like, I told them, looking at their tired faces. Mrs. Delson jumped at the chance, while Zach said he was just going to go back home. After I showed Mrs. Delson the guest room, I walked back to my room, opening the door as quiet as I could. Ruby was dead asleep, her chest rising and falling every 2 seconds. I pulled over a chair to sit next to her, tucking in the blankets around her before sitting down. She looked so peaceful when she slept, as though none of what had just happened. There was a seed of sadness in the pit of my stomach as I watched her shift. Reaching forward, I moved the hair from her face, taking a better look. I wished she knew how much it hurt me. I wished she knew that I wasn't some uncaring bastard who didn't care about her. I rejected her because I cared about her. My hands fell to her side on the bed, near her stomach. As the time ticked by, I became tired, my eyelids falling as I tried to shake myself awake. Soon enough, I couldn't stay awake anymore, and I fell into a deep sleep by her side.